Wars just happen. They come around every once in a while, and it's not something that can really be avoided. This isn't like peace isn't something we can really just bring about so quickly. War is not something to fear. War is something to embrace. It is something that naturally comes, and so we must deal with it. As we often do on this channel, anytime we get the opportunity to, Russian State TV is translated by Julia Davis of the Russian Media Monitor, and we watch and I'll read the transcript and we'll see what Russian State TV, which is the only news broadcasting available for a lot of Russian people, definitely in certain areas of the country, available. So if they want to hear news about the war, or if they want to get opinions about the war and get like an on-the-ground, day-to-day reporting on how the war is going, this is really the only option for a lot of Russian people. Definitely if they're not extremely like technically online, if they just have their TV, for a lot of them, this is it. And so it's really important to sit down and watch and see what everyday Russians are consuming in their media. And the reason I wanted to talk about this example was because in this example, they talk about basically destroying Ukraine, wiping it off the map, and erasing the idea that it even ever existed. And that Russia deserves to be an empire, because and the way it is behaving now in Ukraine is only natural for Russia because of its immense size and influence. Let's watch this social media clip. Let's watch what Russian State TV has to say about Ukrainians this week.
Песков заявил, что свержение действующей власти в Киеве не является целью российской военной операции на Украине. Прямая цитата. А Лавров сегодня сказал, что украинский народ будет освобожден от
said that Ukrainian people will be freed of their neo-Nazi rulers.
За кого?
Who are you
за
for? Peskov?
За Lavrov? Или за то, чтобы Украина
or for
вообще не
Ukraine
была
being
на
erased from
карте
the map
мира?
of the world? Okay, so can I also just say, when people criticize me for not taking the nuclear threat super seriously, like, oh my god, the world's about to end, the reason why I don't take it super seriously, by the way, I'm going to fix my camera here in a second. The reason why I don't take it as seriously, there's a million reasons, and I've already uploaded many videos talking about it. We should take it seriously, but we shouldn't treat it like it's an active threat to end the world right now, as if it's right around the corner. And part of the reasons why is because in the lead up to any nuclear attack, the Russian position on it would be clear, crystal clear. They would say, we are going to do this unless X, Y, and Z, because Russia would like to, in most circumstances, avoid using these types of weapons, definitely since it's going to come with massive economic and diplomatic ramifications for the country. And so they would be more clear about their usage and less vague about it in the lead up. That's one of the main reasons I don't have too much fear about it. But what we're talking about here is Dmitry Peskov and then Lavrov saying two separate things, like right back to back of each other. And we've seen this as well with Russian ambassadors saying one thing and then Russian state officials saying another. But this one, it was Dmitry Peskov saying, the goal of our war is not to see the government in Ukraine overthrown. We're not going to replace the government there. That's not the goal of our war. It has to do with other things. But then Sergei Lavrov, hours later, comes out and says, hey, we will destroy the government in Ukraine. We will wipe it off the face of the earth. This inconsistency in messaging seems to be kind of everywhere. If you look at the Russian state, and how they talk about the war, and I think the reason why is a lot of Russian government officials around Putin actually don't know what the plan is. Is the plan still to remove the Zelensky government for power? Is that more of a goal that they stated at the start, but is now more of a backseat kind of, and it's a vague goal? Now our goal is more moderate, but we're not going to say that openly. Like, what is the position? And I think a lot of Russians have, from my communication with Russians, who even the ones that I've talked to that support the war, a lot of them seem to be most confused at exactly what the goal of the war is now. Is it just to take as much land as possible, or is it to get rid of the government of Ukraine? How do we win? Where's the goal? It's very hard to win a war where you don't know what the goal is for winning. Then again, if you just redefine what winning is at the last second, then you can always win. And I think that might be it. I think it might be that they just want to be able to redefine what winning always was at the last second, so no matter what happens, they can say we won. You know, even if it was just a protection of Crimea. I've said it in many conversations, not only with you, that from my point of view, as long as Ukraine continues to exist in any state, the threat to Russia will also continue to exist. Clearly, Ukraine is not the only one posing a threat, but Ukraine is a direct, constant threat. You can deal with Hungarians, Poles, Americans, Mexicans, or anybody else, even the penguins in the Arctic. But you can't agree on anything with the Russian people who call themselves on Ukraine on the basis of rejecting everything that is Russian. This is an etiological enemy. Therefore, in my opinion, I don't know whether or not it will remain. This is a problem not only in terms of military actions in Ukraine, this is a problem of global politics. But I believe that all efforts should be devoted to make sure that there is not even a memory left of it. So his position isn't just that Ukraine needs to lose the war. He wants this to be a war of annihilation. But the thing that needs to be annihilated in his view is the Ukrainian identity, the Ukrainian nation state, the Ukrainian language. There should be no remembrance of the fact that Ukraine ever existed. And the only thing that this reminds me of is I remember seeing like old ISIS videos where they would like take statues from bygone eras, like many years past, thousands of year old statues, and they would smash them on camera, destroy ancient cultural artifacts and ruins important for history, and destroy them because they wanted to rewrite history. They wanted to rewrite history, and they saw them as sacrilege to their faith. And that's the only thing that can really remind me of. This is all it can remind me of, really.
Since we've communicated many times, you know that I completely and totally agree with you. The
Ukrainian problem is only one of many. It was and it remains only one of many. Rostislav offered his version of an answer. I won't hide it that I believe it to be smart, correct, and most importantly, rational. Again, he's talking about the annihilation of Ukraine, of its nation state, of its people, of its history, of everything. Annihilating it off of the face of the earth so people don't even know it ever existed. Because it's almost like an admission of like, as long as these people know their history, know their culture, they will continue to resist us. So the only solution is not to leave Ukraine and let them run their own affairs, as every other colonial power had to come to terms with when it comes to Africa, when it comes to Rhodesia, when it comes to South Africa, when it comes to any number of colonial holdings. Russia doesn't need to come to terms with that reality. Russia can ignore that reality if they make the Ukrainians forget that they're Ukrainian. I insist that I'm a rational person. I believe that this is rational for everyone. For the citizens of the former Ukrainian Soviet Republic. I like that he can't even just say, for the citizens of Ukraine. Oh, it's the citizens of the former republic. Like, he just views it as an illegitimate government. Has to pretend it doesn't even exist. And even for the Europeans, even the Poles would benefit by Ukraine not existing. It would be much better and more peaceful for everybody. I understand they dislike Russia more than Ukraine. It's true, of course. Let's be fair. They certainly have historical reasons for their bumpy feelings towards us. To be clear, Russia has engaged in mass deportations of Poles off of its territory. They've engaged in a lot of cultural suppression. They've done a lot of bad things to Poland. There's a reason why there's a lot of historical animus there. But they never had any warmth, any compassion towards Ukrainians. They've never had it, and they cannot have it. Okay, so what he's talking about here is the fact that Ukraine and Poland have had a lot of strife, a lot of like mass killings of one and the other in order to claim territory and claim land and claim like a superiority of culture. This is true of many European peoples who have fought with many other European peoples. But Poland and Ukraine seem to have largely put that history behind themselves and have grown together through their shared history of being victims of Russian imperialism, of Russian empire, right? And so I would say that the only ones in Poland who I've seen continue to like hold these feelings towards Ukrainians seem to be the extreme Ukrainian far right. And some very elderly Polish people. I've actually had reporter friends of mine interview people who blamed the missile that struck that Polish village, blamed it on Ukrainian refugees. Not even the Ukrainian government, not the Russian missiles or the old faulty Soviet equipment 50 years old, 1970s S-300 missiles, but Ukrainian refugees. So there is still animosity towards Ukrainians. But it was a little bit more than a bumpy relationship with the Russian Federation. We're talking about Polish and Russian history. And it seems like he's basically saying like Europe would benefit. Look, we can split up Ukraine. We can give part of Ukraine to Romania. We can give part of Ukraine to maybe, I don't know, Poland, Hungary. He's talking about splitting up Ukraine like the Europeans split up Africa. So these are the times we ended up in. On one hand,
с одной стороны,
it's impossible,
невозможно и глупо и дико радоваться войне, а с другой стороны, не покидает действительно какое-то такое странное ощущение, что Россия, у которой было 30 мирных лет, но это что-то такое.
Okay, let's be clear. Russia did not have 30 years of peace after the collapse of the Soviet Union. They had 2 wars in Chechnya and invaded Georgia. So they did not have. They invaded Chechnya twice.
Такое очень странное, очень невозможное.
Very impossible.
А вот то, в чем мы оказались сейчас, да, это такое привычное состояние. Тут возникает масса исторических аналогий, примеров каких-то. И вот просто исходя из того, насколько много этих примеров, то есть сколько людей в русской истории действительно форму носили военную, были военными, воевали, ты понимаешь, что ну, вот как-то, наверное, кто-то скажет, что это проклятие русское, а кто-то скажет, да нет, видимо, империя такого размера, а Россия, по сути своей, по устройству своему все равно является и может быть только империей. Империя всегда это военное государство, а раз военное государство должно время от времени воевать. Приводить к покорности, либо замерять окружающих варваров. Но вот сейчас варвары оказались на западных границах. С варварами идет тяжелая, трудная кампания. Те, кто не занимался античной историей, знают, что и у Великого Рима были тяжелые и сложные кампании с варварами, в том числе и на западных границах. К слову, многие все равно у них проскакивает в словах, но вот такое ожидание, желание, вот поскорее бы все закончилось. Вот поскорее, вот надо вот перейти к чему-то новому, более спокойному, более привычному. Кто-то говорит, да нет, это надолго, быстро это не закончится. Но его быстро затыкают, говорят, да ну прекрати, да людоед какой-то, как-то оно быстро не закончится. Война же никому не выгодна. Война — это всегда кровь, это смерть, это разрушение. Вот, и человечество прошло этот длинный путь, вот эту вот бесконечную эволюцию для того, чтобы жить в состоянии вечного мира. В какой момент мы поверили в эту химеру, честно говоря, я понять не могу. Войны шли в Евразии, войны шли в Африке, войны шли в Латинской Америке непрерывно. Возможно, это вас не обнадежит, возможно, это вас не успокоит, но мне кажется, было бы не лишним так слегка перенастроить, перепрошить собственные мозги немножечко на другой исторический ритм, в котором мы 1200 лет находились, находимся и, скорее всего, и будем находиться.
Okay, so I have a few things to say about this. I've already expressed some of my feelings. The next thing I would like to say is this guy openly states that Russia can only exist as an empire. as an empire. And when you look at Chechnya and look at a lot of these areas that Russia holds dominion over, it's not hard to come to that conclusion, that a lot of the territorial holdings of Russia is that of an empire. And so he kind of says, like, if we live as an empire, the people who are, being ruled over by us might every once in a while say no. And therefore it is our job in the inevitable fighting of humans, because he talks about war as kind of an inevitability, that wars just happen. They come around every once in a while, and it's not something that can really be avoided. This isn't like peace isn't something we can really just bring about so quickly. War is not something to fear. War is something to embrace. It is something that naturally comes, and so we must deal with it. So this justification could be used to justify any war of imperial conquest ever. Russia's an empire, and wars are inevitable. Therefore, if Russia invaded Estonia tomorrow, he would just repeat the same argument. Russia's an empire, and wars are inevitable. Invades Latvia, Russia's an empire, war is inevitable. Lithuania, Russia's an empire, and war is inevitable. Moldova, the one that I'm most fearful of, definitely because of their fooling around in Transnistria, war is inevitable, and Russia's an empire. These justifications for war can be used in any attack Russia gives or does anywhere. Not just Ukraine, but quite literally in any country it would want to invade. And many of the historical justifications given, could be used not only against Ukraine when they talk about Russia's empire and the collapse of the Soviet Union, but it could be used to invade Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldova, Romania, Poland. I mean, any number of countries. And I do want to say, like, I know some of us, kind of go overboard and say, no, we're going to have Russian troops on, like, California's shores when we talk about the future of Russian imperialism. But Ukraine isn't the only end goal for people like this. This guy is very openly declaring that we run an empire and therefore wars happen. If Putin was to invade Kazakhstan tomorrow, he could use the same exact justification with no pushback. In fact, on Russian state TV, there is some suggestions about Kazakhstan specifically. Here's a news segment where one of the hosts actually talks about maybe Kazakhstan being the next target. Let me play it. Let's pay attention to the fact that the next problem is Kazakhstan, because the same Nazi processes can start there as in Ukraine. And we have the longest border there. And there's a lot of Russians there. And the nuclear fuel for all of Rostom is also there. Look, I don't think this is an official Russian government policy. But what I am saying is that the justifications for the invasion of Ukraine aren't only for Ukraine. Many of them can be applied to many other states. Even states that are technically Russia's allies. Whether you're talking about Russians living within Ukraine's borders and they need to go in there to protect them, as this clip shows, there are Russians in Kazakhstan. There's also Russians in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and many other countries. When we talk about the collapse of the Soviet Union and Russia using their inheritance of the Soviet legacy as a justification to attack, that this was a mistake of the collapse of the Soviet Union, that applies to many of these states that are now post-Soviet states. When they talk about the justification of Russia being an empire and war is inevitable, well, that could be used to justify the invasion of any country. Any country. Look, what I wanted to do by showing you guys this new segment wasn't just to show you guys that there is almost genocidal-like language being used on Russian state TV when they talk about we must erase the fact Ukraine ever existed. We must erase its culture. We must erase its nation state. We must erase its language. We must erase the history of your people, which is such a horrific threat. It really is a horrific threat to not only murder your people, but to make it so that your children never knew that you existed. What a horrific threat. Not only are they making that threat openly on Russian state television, primetime Russian state television, but that the justifications they are using to say such things, such horrific statements, could not only be applied in Ukraine, but in many, many, many other countries. And that's also one of many reasons why I think it's important to support Ukraine now, so this type of thinking doesn't come back to bite us later.